It was supposed to be a smooth flight. I had settled into my seat in first class, my favorite spot, with the plush leather cushioning, ample legroom, and the quiet that came with being separated from the rest of the passengers. I adjusted my seat and leaned back, ready to relax on the 6-hour journey. The flight attendants were already making rounds, offering drinks and snacks, when I noticed a woman sitting a few rows ahead. She was glaring back at me, her eyes narrowed. At first, I thought nothing of it. Maybe she was having a bad day, I thought. But then she stood up abruptly and began walking toward me. I had no idea what was going on, but something about the way she was marching down the aisle made my stomach twist with unease. As she approached, I couldn't help but overhear her muttering something to the flight attendant. The words sounded harsh, and I saw the attendant nod nervously, almost apologetically. She finally reached me, and without any warning, the woman's voice broke through the hum of the cabin. "You need to leave," she snapped. "This is for people who actually belong here." My eyes widened in confusion. "I'm sorry, what?" I asked, my voice a little shaky, unsure if I had heard her correctly. "You're sitting in first class," she continued, "and you're clearly not supposed to be here. Go back to your proper seat." I glanced around the cabin, bewildered. It wasn't like I had done anything wrong. I had paid for my ticket, after all. My fingers tightened around the armrest, trying to steady myself. I knew what was happening, and yet it didn't make sense. "Excuse me," I said, now trying to keep my composure. "I'm in my seat, and I've got a first-class ticket." She looked me up and down, a sneer playing at the edge of her lips. "I don't think so. You don't belong here. I'm asking you to leave." The flight attendant stood frozen at the back, watching the exchange unfold. I could feel the tension in the air, the weight of everyone's eyes on us. The woman wasn't backing down, and neither was I. My mind raced. What was going on? Why was this happening? I knew I wasn't imagining things. She was targeting me for some reason. I stood up slowly, not wanting to escalate things, but unsure of what else to do. "Look," I said, trying to keep my voice calm, "I'm not leaving. I'm not doing anything wrong." Her face reddened, and she stepped closer, her voice lowering into a sharp whisper, almost like she was talking down to me. "You don't deserve to sit here. You don't belong in first class." I could feel my blood starting to boil. What kind of person said things like that? I tried to ignore the sting of her words. "I paid for my ticket," I repeated, as if that was somehow the key to ending this ridiculous confrontation. The woman's eyes narrowed even more. "I'll be speaking to the captain. You can't stay here." Before I could respond, she turned on her heel and marched up the aisle toward the cockpit. I stood there, frozen in a mix of disbelief and anger. What had just happened? I was a paying customer like everyone else. Was this really how things were going to go down? I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself, but then I remembered something. My father. He was the CEO of the airline. I hadn't mentioned it to anyone before, but it was the truth. And in that moment, I knew I had a way out of this. I grabbed my phone from the seat pocket and quickly dialed his number. As the phone rang, I glanced around the cabin. People were still looking at me, some with curiosity, others with mild discomfort. My heart pounded in my chest as I waited for him to pick up. "Hey, Dad," I said when he answered, trying to keep my voice steady. "I need your help. Something weird is going on." He was immediately alert, his voice shifting from casual to serious. "What's wrong?" I quickly explained the situation, the woman, her demands, and my frustration. "Stay calm, sweetheart. I'll take care of it," he said, his tone unshakable. It didn't take long for the situation to escalate. Within minutes, the flight attendants were whispering amongst themselves, clearly unsure of how to handle things. The woman had already reached the cockpit, and I could see the captain approaching in the distance, his face creased with concern. My heart was pounding, but now, it was a different kind of anxiety, one laced with anticipation. I knew my father's voice would make all the difference. The woman stood by the cockpit door, talking animatedly to the captain, pointing back in my direction. I tried to tune out her words, but I could hear snippets, like improper behavior and unfit to be in first class. She was painting me as the problem, turning this whole mess into something I was apparently responsible for. As the captain made his way down the aisle toward me, I rose from my seat again, determined to stand my ground. He was tall, with short, graying hair and an air of authority that made the air around him feel thick. His eyes quickly scanned the situation, from the flight attendants to the angry woman and finally landing on me. "Miss," he began, his voice professional but stern, "I've been informed about the situation here. The lady claims you're causing some disruption. I'm going to have to ask you to leave your seat." I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could, the woman cut in. "She doesn't belong here," she snapped, her eyes flashing with determination. "I've already told her to leave, and she refuses to comply." I could feel the frustration creeping up my spine. "I'm in my seat," I said, trying to keep my voice from shaking. "And I have a first-class ticket." The captain paused, giving me a thoughtful look. His eyes flickered briefly to the woman, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of doubt in his expression. I held my breath. "Please don't let this be a mistake." Just as I was about to speak again, the captain's phone buzzed. He pulled it out of his pocket, glancing at the screen before quickly pressing it to his ear. I caught only a few words before his demeanor shifted entirely. "Yes, sir. Understood. Thank you." He ended the call with a snap, his eyes narrowing as he turned back to the woman. "Ma'am," he began, his tone suddenly colder, "it seems there's been a misunderstanding. This young lady is not only in her rightful seat, but she is also personally related to the CEO of this airline." The woman blinked, her face draining of color as she processed his words. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The captain continued, his voice firm. "I suggest you take your seat and calm down, or I'll have to involve security." There was a long, tense silence. The woman looked completely taken aback, her expression turning from fury to sheer embarrassment. Without a word, she backed off, retreating to her seat at the back of the cabin. The flight attendants exchanged looks, their nervous tension dissipating. As the woman settled back into her seat, I couldn't help but feel a surge of satisfaction. For a moment, the cabin was completely still, as if everyone were waiting to see how the situation would unfold. I glanced around the passengers, some of whom were now exchanging quiet murmurs, no doubt gossiping about the scene that had just played out. The captain gave me a respectful nod before turning to walk back toward the cockpit, his tone still calm but authoritative. "If you need anything, miss, just let one of us know." I nodded, trying to steady my shaking hands. The adrenaline was starting to wear off, leaving me exhausted and slightly shaken. I wanted to sink back into my seat, but I couldn't help but glance back at the woman. Her face was flushed, and she was staring out the window, her arms crossed tightly. I wasn't sure if she was more embarrassed or angry. As the flight continued, I tried to relax, closing my eyes and leaning back in my chair. But my mind kept racing, replaying everything that had happened. What had made her treat me like that? It was one thing to have a disagreement over something trivial, but this had been personal. A few minutes later, the flight attendants came by to offer drinks again. I politely declined, not really in the mood to talk. I felt like everyone was watching me, almost as if they were waiting for me to make the next move. The whole situation had put me on edge, and I just wanted to be left alone for the rest of the flight. But as I sat there, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. Sure, the woman had backed down, but I knew her anger hadn't disappeared. She'd probably be planning her next move as soon as we landed. I pulled my phone from my bag and opened the message from my dad, just a quick text saying, "Glad it worked out, but let me know if you need anything else." I quickly typed back, "Thanks, Dad. Everything's under control." As I put the phone down, I glanced out the window. The clouds below us looked peaceful, almost serene. For the first time since the incident started, I finally allowed myself to take a deep breath and relax. The tension in my body slowly started to ease, and I sank into the comfort of my seat. But I couldn't help but wonder, what would happen when we landed? As the plane began its descent, I felt a slight nervous flutter in my stomach. The smooth, comforting hum of the engines as we approached the runway was a stark contrast to the tense moments earlier. But still, I couldn't shake the feeling that the woman might cause trouble again once we were on the ground. The flight attendants moved up and down the aisle, preparing for landing, but I barely noticed them. My mind kept returning to the scene, to the woman who had tried to humiliate me, to the sudden rush of knowing that my father had the power to end it all with one call. It felt surreal. The plane touched down with a gentle thud, and the usual chatter among passengers resumed as we taxied toward the gate. I fastened my seatbelt and watched the woman out of the corner of my eye, still sitting quietly in her seat, but I could tell by the stiff way she held her posture that she wasn't going to just let it go. When the plane finally came to a halt, the seatbelt sign flicked off. The cabin erupted into motion, with passengers standing, grabbing their bags, and stretching after the long flight. But I stayed seated for a moment, gathering my things, taking one last look around before stepping into the aisle. Just as I stood up, the woman moved to block my path, stepping into the aisle with a determined look on her face. "Excuse me," she said, her voice low and almost apologetic. I just wanted to say that I was out of line. I didn't know who you were. It won't happen again." I wasn't sure what to make of her sudden shift. Part of me wanted to snap back at her, to remind her how awful she had been. But instead, I took a deep breath, trying to keep my cool. "I appreciate that," I said, my voice steady. "Just remember, everyone deserves respect, no matter where they're sitting." She nodded, her face reddening again. Without another word, she stepped aside, allowing me to pass. As I walked off the plane, I caught a glimpse of the flight attendants exchanging glances, likely still reeling from the scene that had unfolded just hours earlier. But to me, the incident was already in the past. My father had handled it, and I wasn't going to let one rude woman ruin my day. I stepped into the terminal, feeling a sense of relief wash over me. I knew this wouldn't be the last time something like this would happen, but for today, I had stood my ground, and that was enough.